At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. Only on Super NES. You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello, everybody. This is Super NES podcast, episode number 199, coming at you this time. So we are, as usual, your co-hosts. I'm Greg. He's Joe.
Hi.
And we're covering a game this time that was Joe's pick. One of the more classic, well, originally classic, maybe nowadays not so much. Like, we'll get into it, but definitely one of the more, fondly remembered, at least, JRPG titles for the Super NES. The original Breath of Fire. We covered Breath of Fire 2 with George way back in the early days of the podcast. I think it was episode 5 or something like that. So, but we never actually covered the original game. So we're going to take care of that here, right now. So, anyway, so before we get into the game, I do want to make a quick announcement because this may affect some of you. We have recently changed hosting services. The last episode, the bonus episode that was released recently, was the first episode to be up on the new hosting service. We're now over on Pinecast because Geekade, the network that we're part of, is now trying to consolidate all their other podcasts. Podcasts look over to Pinecast, so it's all in one place. And they pay for hosting, so that's a win-win situation as far as I'm concerned. So. I mention this here because the RSS feed should automatically be carrying forward. I'm not aware of any problems. If anybody had any problems with the feed or whatnot, please let me know. You can either find us on Facebook or you can send me an email directly. I'll give the email toward the end of the podcast. You can still use Libsyn if you want to for right now. I paid for Libsyn hosting for one more month. So as of the end of November, December 1st, Libsyn is going to be going dark. So just remember to have all your... to have your feeds and everything over carried over. The new website for the podcast is going to be the Super NES podcast with dashes.pinecast.co. And I also post additional official links in the Facebook group, so people there are aware of this as well too. But if you just do a search for Super NES podcast in your RSS feeds and whatnot, it should come up. So, like I said, as far as I know, everything's being carried forward automatically. I'm just mentioning this here as public service announcement to make sure nobody got caught. But when we discontinue Libsyn toward the end of the month. So, with the podcast business out of the way, Joe, what made you decide to want to cover this game?
So my Breath of Fire experience is basically 3 and 4 for the PlayStation, and I came into Breath of Fire after Final Fantasy VII, so that kind of tints my opinion a little bit and whatnot of the franchise and what I played. That being said, I am a turn-based RPG guy. I have a big issue with action RPGs. I just can't get into them as much as I do turn-based. So, I'd been playing Dragon Quest 1 and 2 within the past, 6 months, and it's just, one of those things where, I'm in turn-based RPG mode, and I was like, you know what, if I'm going to play an RPG and it's going to be for the podcast, I might as well go to the beginning of the franchise that I enjoyed, and start there. So that's why I suggested Breath of Fire. And, this podcast is for me to enjoy, games that I haven't played yet. So this is another game where I have never touched this. I never even thought of going back to play it because, 3 is a very good game. 4, I didn't realize is part of the formula, as in, all these games are pretty much almost carbon copies of each other with slight story changes. So that was, interesting, and I only realized that playing this game.
Yeah, that's mostly true. We'll get into this, in a little bit here.
Yeah.
So have you played Breath of Fire 2, at all yet?
I have not.
Okay, all right, yeah. So my experience with the series is because it has been so many years since we covered Breath of Fire 2, I will, I'm sure that I will repeat myself a little bit here, but I played Breath of Fire 1 and 2 both when they came out, really like both games. Breath of Fire 1 and 2 are the only games in the series that connected to, the only games in the series that connected story-wise. Breath of Fire 2 is a direct sequel to Breath of Fire. The rest of the games in the Breath of Fire franchise kind of do the Final Fantasy formula, where it's like there are elements taken over from game to game, but they're not the same. So, there's no connection in story after that, and story after that point. Spoiler: I like Breath of Fire. I think Breath of Fire 2 is a better game. Breath of Fire 2 may be my favorite in the series, although Breath of Fire 3 is also very, very, very good. I also played I also played that one like it was new. Breath of Fire 4 is fine. It's a passable game. I think it's not my favorite in the series, but it plays like okay. So, all these games came out in the 90s. Breath of Fire 4 came out in 2000. But then you also had Breath of Fire 5, Dragon Quarter, which was only available on the PS2, and I've never played that one, so I can't really tell you how that one is.
I wouldn't even call that Breath of Fire 5. So they specifically left the number off of that game, and I think it's because of the
in North America they did. In Japan it was called Breath of Fire 5.
Oh, okay, because I'll tell you, I feel like they purposely left it off because they went in a different direction.
They did, yes.
Everything is kind of overhauled there, and I did not like that experience. That's one of those things where it's like, I wish that Capcom would kind of at least remaster maybe the first 4 and put them out in a collection. So this way, people can experience those games and maybe use it as a launching platform to maybe produce a real 5th game, without, again, action RPG. There are action RPG elements, so it's just doesn't sit well with me. And I understand that's the trend also for today. Like, as far as today's RPGs, a lot of them are action RPGs. I'm even having a hard time getting through Dragon Quest 11 or 9 or whatever the heck it is for the Switch, because it's got some turn-based elements, but it's majority. It's an action RPG, and I'm just like, eh.
Yeah, I don't have quite that problem that you do. I love action RPGs too, but I do agree there's something there's something definitely nostalgic and therapeutic about turn-based RPGs. So there are some of those still being made. Dragon Quest XI was mostly turn-based. I think some of the Persona games are turn-based. I haven't really I haven't really spent any time with them, so I can't tell you about Persona 4 or 5. That's not my. Those are my ever-growing need-to-play list.
I've heard of those games, and I've seen gameplay, and every review I've seen is, the story is fantastic and deep, and whenever I think of story is fantastic and deep, it means I'm going to be sitting through a lot of dialogue, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
They're long games.
I have to mentally prepare myself to sit through, large bunches of dialogue.
Yes, they're long games. The music in those games is also excellent. It's excellent. I have heard a good part of the soundtrack. It's great music too. So, but anyway, Capcom just decided after that to pretty much give up on the Breath of Fire franchise, which is I'm not sure why. Just the Breath of Fire series was always popular, but I guess never got the same levels of success that it did to say Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy. So they decided to turn their energies toward other things. So because Capcom's mostly known these days either for the Street Fighter or Resident Evil franchises. So, and that's been their bread and butter for a while now. So
and I'm sure you're going to talk about this, when we get into the development of this game and backstory. But I did not know this was the first and pretty much only RPG that Capcom ever did. So I just think that, by the time, 3 and 4 came out, and maybe even that horrible 5, they just realized that, the audience is there, but they're not fully committing because you still have, Square Enix and Squaresoft and, or Enix and Square in the 90s, and then when they combine together to do their thing, they're just a juggernaut now as far as RPGs go. And it's just Capcom is known for their fighting games, their beat 'em ups, and now Resident Evil, through the 90s and 2000s, RPG is not something I associate with Capcom. So there's that.
I guess I can also say, yeah. So I guess to be fair, I can also say Mega Man because Mega Man 11 did come out recently and did very well. So it is nice to see Capcom dusting that franchise back off again. So
Yeah,
you know,
but if that's any inclination of the future, that means we won't see another Breath of Fire for at least 20 years.
probably maybe not ever because
Right.
Capcom did dust the name off 2016 to make to make Breath of Fire 6 for Windows and Android, but that was a Japanese free-to-play only MMORPG, which only lasted about a year and a half. So,
Yeah.
so that game's Breath of Fire in name only, and it never got a Western release. So, given that, I really don't think Breath of Fire is going to be around again. But I do agree with you, though. A collection would be nice.
Yes.
The game was re-released on the GBA a while ago, which we'll talk about here later on. I played that version of the game too, which is very good. There are some differences, but Breath of Fire is also available. There's also available on both the virtual console. That's also available like on the Switch. So if you have the Nintendo membership, you also can play Breath of Fire 1, and I think 2 is on there as well too. On your Switch. How'd you play the game this time around, Joe?
Believe it or not, I have a Game Boy thing that has a Raspberry Pi in it, and that's what I played it on. Just because, the handheld portability, and I didn't even think to look at the Switch and look at the Super Nintendo lineup that was on there to see if it was even on there. So that probably would have been a much better experience in all honesty. But, I missed
But if you play the
boat on
GBA
that.
version, but if you play the GBA version, that's also an improvement too. But mostly an improvement. Like I said, we will get into it. And yes, I just confirmed Breath of Fire 2 is available also on the Virtual Console and Switch as well too. So anyway, so the original Breath of Fire was developed back in 1993 in Japan. It took over a year for it to come out in the States. It didn't get much release until August of '94. So, and the game is a typical 2D a 2D top-down game of time periods. Like most of the game is played from a overhead view. Combat's done in a very nice kind of like slanted 2D viewpoint. We're kind of like looking things at a side. It kind of reminds me about like Super Mario RPG used the same perspective as far as its battles went. So. You have your characters on the bottom, the enemies on the top. You can have four people. You can have 4 people in your party if like one time. So you have to. So you have magic spells which are used for action points. Like how you I use that. Very typical RPG of the time period. As far as that goes. The GBA version of the game came out in 2001, which has improvements, which we'll talk about here later on, like I already said. So, the story of this game is typical nonsense kind of fantasy like RPG flair. I mean, don't get me wrong. As far as the actual presentation of the story, the characters, it's very good, especially for its time periods. But just the story, the story of the game has pretty typical, typical formulas of all the stuff you see in games like this, persecuted people, prophesized hero, evil force, blah blah blah. You've heard all this before. So, that said, the characters in this game are pretty developed. For a game that came out, like in the early '90s. So. Joe, since you're new to this franchise, I'm curious to hear your perspectives as far as gameplay. What you didn't like about it.
All right. Well, first off, let's talk about the fact that the sister casts a stone spell that pretty much freezes everybody in stone and gives the opportunity for her to be kidnapped and set up this entire story. Talk about a MacGuffin that it literally just exposition just shows up and goes, "Hey, check it out, we got an RPG." That made me kind of chuckle.
Like I said, stereotypical elements are all in play here. So.
Yeah, it was just one of those I just kind of laughed because having played 3 and 4, there's a bit more story there. than just that. And it kind of, unfolds where this one was just like, yeah, she casts a spell, everybody's frozen, so, bad guy can steal her. It's all good. And then you're off, you're to be a hero. Wow. Let me tell you, for one, this game's beautiful. I was actually really surprised at how clean and beautiful the graphics were, especially for its time. That being said, though, 3 things really stood out to me. One, I loved the day and night cycle, and how they incorporated that. That's pretty cool. The other thing was the encounter rate is ridiculous.
It's high.
My God. So, and clearly the, programmers knew that it was a little ridiculous because they do give you an auto battle option, which is nice. But also, like, it's like every 5 steps that you're in a battle. It can be so tedious.
I don't think the counter rate is quite as high here as it is in Lufia, but it is pretty high.
I thought that this was as bad as Lufia. That was actually my reference.
I didn't think it was quite that. Yeah, my experience was like that it wasn't quite that egregious, but.
And I also feel like they don't give you enough experience. I feel like it took forever to level up your character.
That's true.
So,
yeah, I mean, like
so that was the third thing. So it's like the encounter rate on top of the fact that you get very little XP to be able to level up. It's, for me, it was tedious. And
this being the first RPG for Capcom shows because there are a lot of like. I don't want to say beginner mistakes, but there are a lot of growing pains and whatnot that Capcom had to learn to develop. That's why I think Breath of Fire 2 is a better game overall because those issues got fixed like in that game. So
right, and I completely understand where you're coming from. And Breath of Fire 2 probably is a better game because they did learn from their mistakes with the first game. And I'm not going to fault the game for that because, like I said, it's beautiful. It's got that Capcom music, like it fits the RPG so well. I enjoyed every little bit of it. The one of the other big things for me that kind of bothered me was the fact that like you have to pretty much talk to everyone, which is like any RPG. You got to go into different towns and whatnot. But the problem I found was, one, NPCs repeat themselves with the same information, so it's like you're constantly seeing the same text and dialogue. And then some of the villages looked very much the same. Like it sometimes it was very cut and paste. Again, this is their first RPG, obviously not in their wheelhouse, you know what I mean? So I'm not faulting them for these things, but these are the things I noticed looking at this game 30 years later.
Right. Yeah.
Other than that, I felt overall like this was a pretty good game, like especially being their first attempt.
Yes. Yeah, so the development of this game was mostly handled by Capcom veterans who worked in games like Ghosts and Goblins. But they never, but obviously, like I said before, none of these people had worked on RPGs before in the past. So I think some of that experience shows. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. For a first game, this is very good. Because Capcom said in development they wanted to copy Final Fantasy, and in many ways they did. They did copy Final Fantasy like this. So, speaking about Final Fantasy, they even hired Ted Woosley, who's best known for having translated Final Fantasy, several Final Fantasy games of the West, such as Mystic Quest. Right. They even hired him to translate this game for the for Western release. So based on that, the translation of the game is very good. For time period. So, and the day and night cycle I thought was cool also. This wasn't the first game to do that. Dragon Quest III had already come out at this point, and that was the first game to do that. But yeah, many games this time period didn't do day or night cycles yet. So I do think having this game having already done that at this point was pretty good. So Capcom did learn from some of the things that people were doing successfully. There was just some growing pains in trying to get. Because of course, obviously, they wanted to make their own game. It's okay to get to get inspired by a franchise, but you don't want to make a quick copy of that game either. So
right.
Because nobody would buy it. But so for the most part, the formula worked. The formula would be improved upon in the sequel. But for like I said, for first game and first effort in this, they did a pretty good job, I thought, like overall. So, Tecmo would have the same problems later on when they started coming out with the what's the name? What's the name of the franchise that they do? Tales, the first Tales game.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, yeah. So, but I mean, like companies cannot make an RPG overnight. They're very, even more so today, and even true back then. They're very complicated, expensive, time-consuming, long projects. So, like there are some RPGs that took like 3, 4, maybe longer years in development before it came out. So, this one was not quite as bad as far as the growing pains went, but they are there.
So one of the reasons I didn't get very far in this game, but I got to experience a good portion of it, was I didn't want to sit there looking at a strategy guide or a FAQ, trying to figure out what I had to do and where I had to go. And that was one of the downfalls of this game. Is I understand translations and things like of that nature, but it seemed to me, and you might know a little bit more than me on this, but it looks like there wasn't enough memory or something, because the menu and your menu item management is so messy, and like I had to look up almost every single item just to find out what it is, because you'd highlight it and it would be like, this works in battle. Well, thanks. What the hell does it do?
There's a reason the menu was redesigned. Redesigned like the GBA port of this game, because I do agree 100%.
Yeah. So, and that's what I saw, of course, after I started playing it, that the GBA port helped with the encounter rate, and the menus was one of the things they fixed. So, kudos to them for doing that. And then, some definitely improved, life improvements. There we go. Quality of life improvements. Yep. And I did like the isometric viewpoint when you're battling, instead of either the first person or the straight left and right that you would get from a traditional RPG. It was very nice.
Yes. Yep. No, I definitely agree with all that. So, so we'll just mention the GBA version like right now. Like Joe said, the GBA port of the game mostly covered quality of life improvements. The main things they did in that version of the game was that the character portraits, they were all like redrawn to make to give them like more of a Breath of Fire-ish look, and also to make them like higher quality. So. The menu system was redesigned, as I already said, to resemble Breath of Fire 2. Their updated cutscene graphics at certain points during the game. Capcom also added the ability to quick save the game like anyone you wanted to.
That's nice.
So, they also added a dash button, so you can dash through the game to improve the slow walking speed. And if you had somebody else who also had this game, you could also use the GBA link cable to exchange items between the copies of the game as well, using a trade feature.
That's cool.
So, the only drawback of the GBA version is of course the same drawbacks that all handheld ports of games suffer. The graphics, music suffered hit somewhat. Yeah. To make them fit onto the handheld system, but they're not bad. I mean, overall, it's still. I think the GBA version of the game is probably my personal suggestion for a newbie would be to start with the GBA version of the game. If you want to, the original version of the game on the Switch or the Virtual console is fine as well too. But I think the quality of life improvements that the GBA version of the game made is worth tracking it down or obtaining through other means. So. But yeah, so that's just my personal thoughts on that. So you already mentioned the graphics, Joe. The graphics of this game are very good. I agree with you that. They're beautiful. They're beautiful, large hand-drawn sprites. The enemies look good. The bosses. Everything in the game is detail. There is some washing out of colors every now and then, especially in the towns. But I thought overall, the graphics of the game really are very sharp. So, but Capcom games this time period usually usually were like very graphically impressive. So I'm not surprised that they, this game also graphically looks very nice.
Yeah,
So,
and that's what I was going to mention when we, actually zeroed in on the graphics. Like, yes, they are beautiful graphics, but also, like, Capcom at this time was killing it with, Mega Man X and even the
Ghosts and Goblins.
the Super Street Fighter series. Like, like they had an incredible grasp on the Super Nintendo, and they definitely made some beautiful games.
Yes.
Aladdin is another one that, comes to mind as far as beautiful graphics go.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like the animated movie actually moving on your screen.
I forgot to develop the Super NES port of that. So, but good point. The music also is very good. Like, it's a very good RPG-ish soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
So, definitely one of the stronger entries in the system. It's like, this is soundtrack you might actually this is soundtrack you might actually like want to listen to like offline because the music in this game is like very good.
Agreed.
So, what do you think about the controls overall? Do you have any problems as far as like moving around or navigating beyond the menu system, of course? Would you already
Yeah, I mean, outside of the encounter rate, the game's responsive. I never had any issues. It wasn't like I accidentally clicked something when I shouldn't have or anything like that. Yeah, I just it's that encounter rate, man.
The game also came with like 3 spots to save the battery, which is pretty good for games of the time period. So, so there are some puzzles in the game too to come across every now and then. The puzzles for the most part are like pretty easy. I don't think the puzzles in the game are really all that challenging. So,
I mean I kind of breezed over those because they're not challenging at all.
No, they're not. But
it's kind of like I remember like there's this one puzzle aspect in Mystic Quest where like you have to find this pillar and you got to move it to like just the right spot to be able to like make that connection so you can get over to like the next platform. And that's kind of what some of these were. Like it was just, it was in your face, easy. It wasn't like, oh, I got to look around and figure out what the hell's going on. It was all very much like right there for you.
Yes. Yep. Nope. Totally agree. And you also mentioned this earlier, Joe. The game can be kind of confusing as to where to go. This is definitely typical of like early RPGs where it's like there are hints and clues as to where to go, but like having either Nintendo Power or a strategy guide handy was definitely going to be helpful with like this game.
Yeah.
I definitely used NP quite a bit back in the day to beat this game. So. I may even have called the game counselors once or twice. I don't remember. I don't remember calling specifically about this game, but it's very possible I did. So, but yeah. So nowadays, of course, like you can just go online and look. But
right.
This was typical of a game where it's like you had to like talk to everybody in the town. Maybe talk to them twice. Try to find out what's going to trigger an event to allow you to proceed. That kind of stuff. So like. I'm glad games moved past that because it's like very aggravating for sure. So
yeah, there was one town where I felt I talked to everybody, but like the story just was not progressing. And come to find out, there is a specific lady in that town that you have to talk to her not once, not twice, but 3 times. And on the 3rd time, after you've talked to everybody else and they've already repeated their dialogue, she finally says what she needs to say to be able to trigger the next story beat. And it's just like, things like that were just like, I don't miss that part of turn-based RPGs.
Nope, I definitely agree with you. So, what do you think about the overall difficulty of the game? Did you feel challenged at all, or did you think that because you mentioned you didn't think the enemies gave you a lot of XP, but did you feel that the progression through the game was okay? Did you have to grind any?
I mean, obviously it's an RPG. You're going to have to grind at some point. But no, I don't think that. So, because of how I am with like turn-based RPGs, and I know there's going to be some grinding. The first I'd say hour and a half, 2 hours of a game is literally me just like walking around and like dealing with that encounter rate and just killing things and gaining experience. I am the guy that will have a level 20 or 25 character before I move on to the next story beat. to not only make sure that I have enough health to be able to survive a boss battle if I make poor choices, but also so that the difficulty of the game really doesn't show for me. But yeah, I felt like once I grinded and I got, up towards that like 25 level mark, like that was like I could pretty much breeze through the rest of the game. It was just the encounter rate fighting me the entire way.
Sure. Yep, definitely for sure. So, no, I thought this game was like relatively easy as far as like RPGs went. It's like it wasn't the easiest RPG I've played, but I thought, I thought it was, but I thought it's like for overall difficulty, it wasn't bad. This is, if you can get over the high encounter rate, this is a pretty good like starter RPG, I think, to play because, because like even the boss fights not really all that difficult as long as you like level it up like appropriately enough. So, and this is a pretty typical average 40-hour JRPG to go through, the time period. So, anything else you want to mention about the game overall, Joe? Like the positive, negative, like before we move on?
No, I think I pretty much covered all my points.
Okay, all right. So, the game got pretty good reviews, both at the time of release and also like currently. So, just taking like we already touched upon most of the pros and cons of the game that the same things the reviewers touched upon also like as well too. The game was only modestly successful in North America, of course, because RPGs were still a very niche market back then. The game sold much better like Japan. However, Western magazine reviews of the game were mostly positive. Just to give you some examples. EGM gave it 40 out of 50. Game Informer gave it 9 out of 10. GameFan gave it 274 out of 300. GamePro gave 12.5 out of 20. Defense Power gave 14.6 out of 20. And Electronic Games gave it 80 plus. So those are pretty high marks like overall. And then those good reviews, pretty much continued like the current day. The current day Metacritic average score for this game is 79%, and that also takes into account modern reviews of the game as well as the contemporary ones. So yeah, pretty good marks overall, I'd say. So we already talked about most of the pros and cons. The same thing that the reviews mentioned upon. Modern reviewers are much more critical about the story and dialogue, which I totally agree with because it is a very cookie cutter story. Because things what was amazing back then is not so amazing these days because obviously things have gotten better since then, but.
Yeah, and I feel like you had a lot of options back then, but I feel like now, like, there's so many more options and diverse options than what you would have back then, too.
Yeah, definitely. So, so GBA port of the game got slightly lesser marks than the Super NES version of the game, obviously. But like I said, that's pretty difficult. That's pretty difficult. Pretty typical when you convert a console game like the GPA. The Mickey Mouse games we looked at a while ago had the same issues.
Yeah.
So obviously this was the first game in the franchise. So Breath of Fire 2 would come out like a couple years later. This also inspired two officially licensed Magna releases in Japan as well too. And then the Japanese name of the game is very close to North American game. In Japan, it was called, translated, Breath of Fire, the Dragon Warrior. They just dropped the subtitle of the game like a release. So, as you might expect with an RPG, there are a bunch of like bugs, glitches, codes, etc. So, there's one way in the game to be able to get 1 million gold to help you out at the start of the game, which is like pretty cool. Did you know about this, Joe? There's a hidden cameo of Chun-Li in the game that you can also trigger.
I did not.
Yep. You can see her twice in the game. Once during the game itself, by doing like certain triggering certain events in the game, like in the town. You can see her like practicing her lightning kick.
Awesome.
And you can also And you can also see her, and you can also see her in the ending scene. Flavor is certain like skill equipped. So,
okay.
The GBA version of the game also features a cameo from Ryu from Breath of Fire 2 in the ending as well too. So, there's a way to be able to skip a boss fight. There's a way to be able to get an infinite battle loop. There's a way to be able to start the game. So there's a way to be able to start the game at level 29 library characters. So, those are the major cheat codes and glitches the game has. But so eBay being an RPG that's especially that it's done pretty it's pretty well today. I mean, like Breath of Fire may not have the same hitting power that the other franchises do, but like I said before, Breath of Fire does have a lot of nostalgia behind it still because a lot of people did play these games. So, and RPGs, especially on Super NES, hold their value very well. So this is a pricier game, the Super NES, compared to many other titles, but it is still but at least especially in cart form, it is still like attainable without breaking the bank. So there are about 48 copies of this game listed currently on eBay at the time you were researching for the podcast. 67 copies sold recently. These are all from North America. These prices all include shipping. Cart prices range anywhere from $30 to $91, depending upon the quality of the cart and the label, and all that stuff. So expensive, but not that bad. So CIB copies also varied wildly in price depending upon how complete and/or good shape that they were in. Those started anywhere from $107 to $292.
Yeah, I mean, so like, I was looking at like literally 2 copies that sold yesterday. You're looking at $40. That's not bad for a Super NES RPG. If you're patient and can wait and get it for like $40, I say totally go for it.
Yes.
I don't think this is an RPG I'd spend like almost $100 for. But complete in box, if you can get it for that 150 mark, absolutely. That's actually, especially as a collector. For an RPG, that's definitely doable.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my overall summary of this game is like recommending the game for an audience like in this day. That depends. If you have nostalgia for JRPGs and somehow missed this one back in the day, definitely play it. If you enjoy Breath of Fire games and somehow missed this one, by all means play it. If you're somebody who's never played a JRPG before, especially a game with this is going to be a hard sell, I think, because I think Breath of Fire 2 does this thing so much better. So, I can't really suggest the game unless you're actually like unless you have nostalgia for JRPGs of this time period and/or have played Breath of Fire games before in the past. Because I think it's a very hard game to get invested in because of all the flaws and issues that this game has. If you don't if you don't have any experience or familiarity with the genre of this time period. I think Breath of Fire 2 is an overall better game on several levels, and would be a game that it would be the game I would say if you want to play the early Breath of Fire game, by all means start with that one. I've not played Breath of Fire 3 or 4 recently, so I can't really know how those games hold up these days since they're PlayStation titles. Some PS titles are very rough these days. Others still hold up very well. So, you may also want to check those games out too as well.
Yeah. So I can't recommend Breath of Fire 2 because I've never played it. Mm-hmm. So what I'll say is, check out Breath of Fire 3. It's definitely the best of the franchise. But if you're looking for something a little older, this isn't that bad for an entry RPG for Capcom, or for the franchise.
Agreed. Yeah.
That encounter rate is kind of rough, but, I did do some browsing. You can get a Game Genie code that kind of helps with that alleviation of, the encounter rate, or if you just want to go all out and just start at level 99 and go that way, then I guess your encounter rate really doesn't matter because you can have auto battle and it'll do its thing. So either way, I would suggest, at least being able to check this out. Definitely look up like gameplay on YouTube or even reviews. There's quite a few out there. There are some passionate fans for this game, for this franchise.
Yes, there are. But the franchise also, yes,
I touched
upon that.
I couldn't finish this game, so of course I had to go to YouTube so that I could get at least some idea of how it was going to end and whatnot. And I was met with quite a few videos, so you definitely have your pick of the litter. If you don't want to play it on the Super Nintendo, like Greg mentioned, it is available on the GBA. I'm gonna have to play that because anything that lowers the encounter rate is right up my alley. So yeah, I mean, I suggest at least trying it.
Yeah. Okay. I also should mention. I also like to mention, like, real quick, like, for European listeners, this game, like many other games this time period, did not get released in Europe originally. Europe did not officially get a copy of this game. Like the GBA version came out like many years later. So, because many RPGs this time period did not get released in the PAL market. So they really missed out as far as like those games went. But so I did want to mention that, like, in passing. But
that's because they had better RPGs on, like, the ZX Spectrum and
the computer market was much bigger over there. Yeah. Yes. So, like, then you also had the problem. So then you also had the problem, like, about having to translate a game for, like, several languages as well too. So
right.
Limited car sizes, that kind of stuff. There's many reasons for that. But
yep.
So anyway, fun to go back to this. Fun to go back to this game, which I haven't thought about playing in like 20 years at this point. So, definitely like a nice, nice trip. So, thank you for suggesting the game, Joe, and definitely if you start playing Breath of Fire 2, let me know what you think of it.
Yeah, will do.
But anyway, if you have any comments or questions or whatever, please feel free to check us out on Facebook, or you can also send me an email directly at the SNESpodcast@yahoo.com. Joe, how can they reach you?
You can find me on Twitter at JOESUX30. I also have a very public Facebook that is not family friendly. And I might as well promote Radical Retro Roundup, which can be found on Facebook and anywhere you can find podcasts. We finally got the first episode up with George and I I hope you guys enjoy it.
Yes, glad to see it back, because it's been like, 2-3 years since you last recorded an episode for that?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. So anyway, as mentioned before, we are a proud member of the Geekade Network. There's a whole bunch of other retro-themed podcasts, and also like both gaming and non-gaming on there, so by all means check it out. And as I mentioned before, the episodes of this podcast now being hosted on Pinecast. So next up is our special 200th episode. And just like last time we hit a big milestone, the 100th episode, we were once again doing a draft episode. So we started finalizing we're finalizing the list of guests. I don't want to say anybody right now, lest things change. But we have a pretty good lineup planned, including people who have been on the podcast before, and also people who have never been on the podcast before. So. And Joe also will be the first time doing a draft episode, because he was not here for like the last one. So should be fun. So check that out. That's coming up next. So as always, we appreciate your support. Thank you very much for listening. For giving us time out of your day. And we'll catch you again later. And we'll catch all of you again next time. Stay safe, be well, and see you folks all again later.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Super power.